On March 17, 1983, inside Laboratory 19 of the State Research Institute in Sverdlovsk 45, military physician named Dr. Alexei Volkov stood before a steel door marked with a single yellow biohazard symbol. His hands did not tremble. His breath remained steady. But behind his eyes, those gray, tired eyes that had seen too much, there lived a question he could no longer silence. What happens when the oath to save life conflicts with the oath to serve the state? He did not know, as he entered that room, that within 72 hours he would become a traitor. He did not know that his name would be erased from every official record, his face removed from every photograph, his existence reduced to a file number in a basement archive that no one would ever read. He only knew that behind that door, in a sealed chamber colder than a Siberian winter, there were 12 human beings strapped to medical beds, and that one of them was coughing blood. The year was 1983. The Cold War had passed its fourth decade. The world was divided not by oceans, but by ideologies, two visions of freedom, two kinds of fear. In the West, people feared the red tide of communism. In the East, they feared the invisible hand of capitalism. But in places like Sverdlovsk 45, a closed city that did not appear on any map, the fear was simpler and more immediate. The fear of what your own government was doing in rooms you were not allowed to enter. Sverdlovsk 45 was not a city in the traditional sense. It was a research complex disguised as a town built in the Ural Mountains during the height of Stalin's paranoia and expanded under Khrushchev's military ambitions. Officially, it did not exist. The postal address was a numbered code. The residents, scientists, military personnel, technicians, and their families were forbidden from leaving without written authorization. The perimeter was guarded by the KGB's 9th Directorate, the division responsible for protecting state secrets and high-ranking officials. Inside the wire fences and concrete walls, approximately 14,000 people lived their lives under constant surveillance. Their mail read, their phone calls monitored, their children taught that the outside world was a place of corruption and danger. Laboratory 19 was the heart of Sverdlovsk 45's darkest work. It was here that the Soviet Union conducted classified medical experiments related to biological warfare and radiation exposure. The official designation was defensive research, a term that allowed the government to claim compliance with the 1972 Biological Weapons Convention while continuing programs that would have horrified the international community. The subjects of these experiments were not volunteers. They were prisoners from the Gulag system, political dissidents deemed expendable, and occasionally soldiers who had committed infractions serious enough to warrant what was euphemistically called special medical service. Dr. Alexei Volkov had worked at Laboratory 19 for 11 years. He had not chosen this assignment. No one chose to work in a closed city. You were selected based on your skills and your reliability, and you accepted because refusal meant suspicion, and suspicion meant consequences. Alexei had been a promising young physician in Moscow, specializing in infectious diseases. When the Ministry of Health summoned him in 1972, the offer was presented as an honor, a position at a state research facility, contributing to the defense of the Soviet Union, with a comfortable apartment, access to special stores with imported goods, and a salary triple what he earned in the capital. He was 29 years old. His wife, Katya, was pregnant with their first child. He said yes because men like him always said yes. 11 years. 11 years of watching human beings used as test subjects for pathogens and experimental treatments. 11 years of writing clinical reports in cold, technical language, describing symptoms and mortality rates as if he were studying bacteria in a petri dish, not people who screamed and wept and begged. 11 years of telling himself that this was necessary, that the Americans were doing the same thing, that someone had to do this work to protect the motherland. 11 years of returning home each evening to his wife and 2 children, kissing them, eating dinner, helping with homework, and never, ever speaking about what he had seen. But something had changed in the winter of 1983. A new pathogen had been introduced to Laboratory 19. delivered in a sealed container by a military courier from Moscow. No name was given, only a designation, Agent K7. The briefing document, classified at the highest level, described it as a modified strain of a hemorrhagic virus, engineered to be more contagious than its natural form. The purpose, according to the research directive, was to develop countermeasures and vaccines in case Western forces deployed similar biological weapons. 12 subjects had been infected 3 weeks ago. The progression was being carefully documented. Alexei had observed the symptoms with the detached professionalism expected of a Soviet military physician. Initial infection produced flu-like symptoms, fever, headache, muscle pain. Within 5 days, the subjects developed severe bleeding from the mucous membranes, nose, gums, eyes. By day 10, internal hemorrhaging began. The subjects vomited blood, their organs failing in a cascade that no treatment could reverse. By day 14, all 12 were expected to be dead. Today was day 17. 9 of the subjects had died. The remaining 3 were in the final stages of the disease. Alexei's task was to perform the scheduled examination, collect tissue samples, and update the clinical files. It was routine. He had done it hundreds of times. He entered the sealed chamber wearing a full protective suit, checked the vital signs of each subject, noted the progression of symptoms, and prepared to leave. That was when he saw it. On the wrist of Subject 7, beneath the medical identification band, there was a small tattoo, 3 letters and 2 numbers, blue ink, faded with time. KTV-42. Alexei stared at it. His breath fogged the faceplate of his helmet. KTV-42 was the postal code for a neighborhood in Sverdlovsk 45. It was his neighborhood. He looked at Subject 7's face. The man was unconscious, his skin pale and mottled with subcutaneous hemorrhaging. His breathing was shallow and labored. But even in that ravaged state, there was something familiar about him. Alexei checked the file attached to the bed. Subject 7, male, age 38, former military engineer. Convicted of unauthorized contact with foreign nationals, serving 15 years in corrective labor. No name, just a number. But Alexei knew. This man had lived in the same apartment complex. This man had once helped repair Alexei's car. This man had children who played with Alexei's children in the courtyard. The room suddenly felt colder than it had ever been. Alexei completed the examination mechanically, his mind racing. He returned to his office, removed the protective suit, and sat at his desk. The file on Agent K7 lay open before him. He read it again, slowly, the way one reads a document that might contain a truth too terrible to accept. The pathogen was highly contagious during the symptomatic phase. Transmission occurred through bodily fluids and aerosol droplets. The incubation period was 3 to 5 days. There was no cure, no vaccine, no treatment beyond palliative care. Mortality rate, 97%. Alexei turned to the next page. It was a security protocol memo, dated 2 weeks ago. Classified for official use only. It outlined procedures in the event of accidental exposure outside the containment facility. The protocol was simple: immediate quarantine, isolation of affected individuals. And the language was carefully chosen: appropriate measures to prevent widespread contamination. He understood what that meant. He had always understood. If Agent K7 ever escaped Laboratory 19, if it ever reached the residential areas of Sverdlovsk 45, the response would not be medical. It would be military. The city would be sealed. No one would be allowed to leave. And if containment failed, the entire population would be deemed expendable. Alexei looked at the calendar on his desk. March 17, 1983. His daughter, Anya, would turn 9 years old in 2 days. His son, Dmitry, was 6. Katya had been complaining of a headache this morning. Just a headache, probably nothing. He tried to return to his work. He tried to focus on the data, the clinical observations, the research that justified his presence here. But his mind kept returning to that tattoo. KTV-42, a neighbor, a human being from his own world, used as a test subject in a sealed room. That evening, Alexei returned home as always. The apartment was warm, filled with the smell of cooking. Katya greeted him with a tired smile. She'd been working at the city's elementary school, teaching mathematics to children whose parents designed weapons. Anya was at the table doing homework. Dmitri was playing with wooden blocks on the floor. "How was your day?" Katya asked. "The same," Alexei said. He kissed her forehead. It felt warm. "Are you feeling all right?" he asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Just tired," she said. "And this headache won't go away. I think I'm catching something." Alexei's heart stopped. Just for a moment. Just long enough for the world to tilt. "Have you been around anyone sick?" he asked. "Half the school has a cold," Katya said, stirring the pot on the stove. "It's going around." He wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe it was just a cold, just the normal illnesses that circulated through every community in winter. But he had spent 11 years studying infectious diseases. He had spent 11 years learning to recognize patterns, and the pattern forming in his mind was one he could not ignore. That night, after the children were asleep, Alexei sat at the small desk in their bedroom and opened his personal journal, a notebook he kept hidden in a drawer. Filled with observations and thoughts he could never speak aloud. He wrote by the light of a small lamp, his handwriting careful and precise. March 17, 1983. Subject 7 is from KTV-42. Katya has a headache and low-grade fever. Anya complained of being tired after school. Dmitri seems fine. I am trying to remain rational. I am trying to believe this is coincidence. But I know the incubation period. I know the symptoms, and I know that if I am right, there is nothing I can do within the system to save them. He closed the journal. He did not sleep. The Soviet Union in 1983 was a nation living under the weight of its own contradictions. It was a superpower, possessing enough nuclear weapons to destroy the world several times over. Yet its economy was stagnating, its agriculture failing, its people standing in lines for bread and toilet paper. It was a state built on the promise of equality, yet governed by a party elite that lived in luxury while workers struggled. It was a society that proclaimed the triumph of scientific socialism, yet relied on fear, surveillance, and propaganda to maintain control. The Cold War, by this point, had become a permanent condition. The initial ideological fervor of the 1950s had given way to a grinding, exhausting stalemate. In the West, Ronald Reagan had recently called the Soviet Union an evil empire, escalating tensions to levels not seen since the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the East, the aging leadership of the Politburo clung to power, terrified of reform and obsessed with maintaining the appearance of strength. The KGB, under Yuri Andropov, who would soon become General Secretary, had expanded its reach into every corner of Soviet life. No one was beyond suspicion. No one was truly safe. In cities like Sverdlovsk 45, this paranoia was especially acute. Closed cities existed in a legal gray zone, governed by military law and KGB oversight rather than civilian authorities. The residents were simultaneously privileged and imprisoned. They had access to goods and services unavailable to ordinary Soviet citizens, but they lived under constant watch. Mail was censored, phones were tapped, informers were everywhere. A careless word, a joke about the party, an unapproved contact with someone from outside, any of these could trigger an investigation that would end careers, destroy families, and sometimes result in disappearances. Alexei had learned to navigate this world. He had learned to speak in the careful, guarded language of Soviet professionals, to express enthusiasm for the system without seeming naive, to demonstrate loyalty without appearing zealous. He attended mandatory party meetings, contributed to voluntary labor on weekends, and made sure his children knew the right answers to give in school. He had become skilled at the double consciousness required of anyone who wanted to survive, believing one thing privately while performing another thing publicly. But now, that careful balance was collapsing. On March 18th, Alexei arrived at Laboratory 19 at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before his scheduled shift. He used his security clearance to access the records archive, a windowless room in the basement filled with filing cabinets containing documentation of every experiment conducted in the facility. He found the file for Subject 7, prisoner number 847. Transferred from a labor camp in Kolyma 6 months ago, selected for the Agent K7 program based on medical screening. The file included a brief personal history: former military engineer, married, 2 children, convicted of anti-Soviet activity after accepting a dinner invitation from a West German trade delegation. Alexei read the file 3 times. Then he returned it to its place and left the archive. He went to the sealed chamber where the 3 remaining subjects were held. Subject 7 was still alive, barely. His breathing was so shallow it was almost undetectable. The hemorrhaging had spread across his entire body, visible through the thin hospital gown. He would be dead by evening. Alexei stood there looking at this dying man, and felt something break inside him. Not suddenly, not dramatically. It was a quiet breaking, like ice cracking under weight, a sound so soft you might not hear it, but irreversible once it begins. He left the chamber and returned to his office. He locked the door. And then he did something he had never done before. He accessed the classified database that tracked medical incidents in Sverdlovsk 45. What he found confirmed his worst fear. Over the past week, there had been 17 reported cases of flu-like illness in the residential sectors. 5 were children, 12 were adults. All had been treated at the city clinic for what was assumed to be seasonal influenza. But when Alexei cross-referenced the addresses, he saw the pattern. 14 of the 17 cases were in neighborhoods adjacent to Laboratory 19. The infection was spreading. Someone in the facility had been careless. A containment breach. A violation of protocol. It didn't matter how. What mattered was that Agent K7 had escaped the laboratory. Alexei sat at his desk, staring at the screen. He thought about what he should do. The correct procedure was clear: report the suspected outbreak to his superior, who would report it to the facility director, who would report it to the KGB commander, who would initiate the security protocol. Quarantine, isolation, appropriate measures. But he knew what appropriate measures meant. He had seen the protocol. In the event of a containment failure involving a pathogen with no known cure, the priority was not to save lives. It was to prevent the spread beyond Sverdlovsk 45. The city would be locked down. No one in, no one out. Medical personnel would document the outbreak for research purposes. And when it was over, the dead would be buried in unmarked graves. The records would be sealed, and the world would never know what had happened. His wife had a headache. His daughter was tired. His son seemed fine, but the incubation period was 3 to 5 days. Alexei closed the database. He sat in his office for 20 minutes, not moving, barely breathing. Then he stood up, put on his coat, and left Laboratory 19. He did not report the outbreak. He went home. Katya was in bed when he arrived. The headache had worsened. She had developed a fever, 38.2 degrees Celsius. Nothing alarming yet, but Alexei had seen enough to know what was coming. He checked Anya and Dmitri. Both were at school. He called the school office and asked to have them brought home, claiming a family emergency. When the children arrived, he examined them carefully, trying not to let them see his fear. Anya's temperature was slightly elevated. Dmitri showed no symptoms yet. "Are we sick?" Anya asked, sensing something wrong. "Just a precaution," Alexei said, forcing a smile. "I want everyone to stay home for a few days. Rest. Drink fluids." That afternoon he returned to Laboratory 19 and did something that, under Soviet law, constituted treason. He entered the restricted pharmacy, used his security clearance to bypass the automated logging system, and removed 3 vials of experimental antiviral medication that had been developed as a potential countermeasure for Agent K27. The medication had never been tested on humans. The animal trials had shown limited efficacy, approximately 30% survival rate in infected primates, but it was the only thing that existed. He smuggled the vials out in his medical bag. That evening, after preparing dinner and putting the children to bed, Alexia administered the first dose to Katya. She was too feverish to ask questions. He told her it was a new flu medication, something strong, and she believed him because she had always believed him. He gave smaller doses to Anya and Dmitri, adjusted for their body weight. Then he sat in the dark living room waiting. By March 19th, Katya's condition had worsened. The fever spiked to 39.4 degrees. She began experiencing muscle pain and nausea. Alexia monitored her constantly, documenting symptoms, adjusting dosages, praying to a god he had been taught did not exist. Anya developed a nosebleed during breakfast. It stopped after a few minutes, but Alexei saw the blood and felt his hands go cold. Dmitri still showed no symptoms. Perhaps the viral load he had been exposed to was lower. Perhaps his immune system was stronger. Or perhaps it was just random chance, the cruel lottery of infectious disease. Alexei could not take them to the city clinic. If he did, they would be diagnosed, reported, and quarantined. The security protocol would be triggered. And once that happened, they would become subjects in the same system that had turned their neighbor into Subject 7. He had to keep them home. He had to treat them in secret. He had to save them alone. On March 20th, 2 KGB officers came to his door. They were young men in plain clothes, polite and efficient. They showed their identification, read booklets with the state seal, and asked if they could come inside. "Dr. Volkov, we are conducting a routine health survey," one of them said. "There have been reports of illness in this sector. We need to verify the status of all residents." Alexei's mind raced. He could refuse entry. He had that right under Soviet law. But refusal would raise suspicion. He could let them in and hide the medication, but they would see Katya's condition and ask questions he could not answer. He chose the middle path. "My wife and daughter have the flu," he said calmly. "I'm treating them at home. Nothing serious." The officer nodded. "We need to verify that personally, doctor. It will only take a moment." They entered the apartment. Alexei led them to the bedroom where Katya lay under heavy blankets, her face pale and damp with sweat. The officer checked her temperature, 39.1 degrees, and made a note in his logbook. "Have you consulted with the clinic?" he asked. "Not necessary," Alexei said. "I'm a physician. I know how to treat influenza." The officer looked at him for a long moment. Then he glanced at his partner, and some silent communication passed between them. "Dr. Volkov, you understand that if there is a communicable disease outbreak, it is your duty to report it immediately." "Of course," Alexei said. "But this is just the flu. It happens every winter." The officer closed his logbook. "We will return tomorrow to check on their condition. If they are not improving, they will need to be examined at the clinic." After they left, Alexei stood at the window, watching them walk down the street. They stopped at another apartment building, knocked on another door. The investigation had begun. He had perhaps 24 hours before they realized what was really happening. 24 hours before the outbreak was officially declared. 24 hours before Sverdlovsk 45 was sealed, and everyone inside became subjects in a final experiment. Alexei returned to the bedroom. Katya's breathing was labored. Anya was crying softly, confused and frightened. Dmitri sat on the floor, playing with his wooden blocks, oblivious. Alexei knelt beside his wife and took her hand. "I'm going to get you out of here," he whispered. "All of you." She looked at him through half-closed eyes. "What are you talking about?" "Trust me," he said. "Just trust me." That night, Alexei Volkov made a decision that would cost him everything. He could not save Sverdlovsk 45. He could not stop the outbreak. He could not change the system. But he could save his family. He began to plan their escape. Sverdlovsk 45 was not designed to be left. The perimeter was guarded by armed soldiers with orders to shoot anyone attempting unauthorized exit. The gates were controlled by electronic locks tied to the KGB security network. Every vehicle entering or leaving was inspected. Every person was required to show internal documentation and external travel authorization signed by the city commander. But Alexei had spent 11 years at Laboratory 19. He knew things that ordinary residents did not. He knew about the emergency evacuation routes built into the facility's design in case of catastrophic contamination. He knew about the underground tunnels that connected Laboratory 19 to the external supply depot 3 kilometers outside the perimeter fence. He knew about the delivery schedules, the guard rotations, the gaps in surveillance. He knew how to disappear. On the morning of March 21st, Alexei did not go to work. He called Laboratory 19 and reported that he was ill, fever, nausea, possible influenza. The administrator who took the call noted the report and told him to stay home until symptoms resolved. No one questioned it. Half the city was sick. Alexei spent the day preparing. He packed a small bag with clothing, food, medication, and identity documents. He withdrew all the money from his secret savings, 3,000 rubles, hidden in a coffee tin for emergencies. He wrote a letter to his parents in Moscow, knowing they would never receive it, but needing to say goodbye. And he waited for darkness. By evening, Katya's fever had broken. The experimental medication was working, not perfectly, but enough. She was weak, disoriented, but alive. Anya's symptoms had stabilized. Dmitri remained uninfected. At 9:47 p.m., there was a knock at the door. Alexei looked through the peephole. 2 KGB officers. Not the same ones from yesterday. These were older, harder. One of them carried a black leather briefcase, the kind used for official documents and arrest warrants. Dr. Volkov opened the door, a voice called, "Not polite, not a request." Alexei's heart hammered. He turned to Katya, who was sitting up in bed, fear in her eyes. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Get dressed," Alexei said quietly. "Wake the children. We're leaving." "What? Do it now." "Don't ask questions." The knocking came again, louder. "Dr. Volkov, this is Colonel Petrov of the Committee for State Security. You are required to open this door immediately." Alexei moved quickly. He helped Katya out of bed, grabbed the packed bag, and led his family through the apartment to the back bedroom. The building was old, constructed in the 1960s, with exterior fire escapes required by Soviet safety codes, but rarely maintained. Alexei opened the window. Cold air rushed in. "We're going down the fire escape," he said. "Alexei, what is this?" Katya's voice was rising. "What have you done?" "I'm saving you," he said. "That's all you need to know." The sound of the front door being forced open echoed through the apartment. Alexei pushed the children through the window first, then helped Katya. He climbed out last, pulling the window shut behind him. They descended the metal ladder, 2 floors down to the courtyard. The night was cold, clear, moonless. Alexei could hear voices shouting from the apartment above. They ran through the courtyard between buildings into the shadows of the industrial sector. Alexei knew every street, every alley, every passage. He had walked this city for 11 years. He had memorized it without knowing why. Now he knew. Behind them, sirens began to wail. They reached the perimeter fence 20 minutes later. It was 3 meters high, topped with barbed wire, monitored by cameras and motion sensors. But Alexei had studied the security reports. He knew where the blind spots were. He led his family to a section near the waste processing facility, where the fence corner created a camera shadow. He had brought wire cutters from the laboratory. He cut through the chain link, pulling it apart just enough for them to squeeze through. Katya went first, then the children. Alexei followed. They were outside Sverdlovsk 45, but they were not free. Searchlights swept the perimeter. Guard towers were being activated. The entire city's security apparatus was mobilizing. Alexei could hear vehicles in the distance, engines roaring, radios crackling. He led his family into the forest. The trees were dense, the ground uneven. They stumbled through darkness, branches tearing at their clothes. Anya was crying. Dmitri was silent, terrified. Katya kept asking what was happening, but Alexei could not answer because he was counting steps, calculating distance, remembering the map he had studied. The external supply depot was 3 kilometers northeast. If they could reach it before the security perimeter expanded, if they could find a vehicle, if they could drive through the night to the nearest open city, too many ifs. They walked for an hour, then 2. The children were exhausted. Katya was feverish again, the exertion pushing her body beyond its limits. Alexei carried Dmitri on his back, held Anya's hand, supported Katya with his free arm. At 1:34 a.m., they reached the supply depot. It was a small facility, 3 warehouses, a guard station, a parking area with delivery trucks. Alexei approached carefully, keeping to the tree line. There was a single guard on duty, visible through the station window, drinking tea and reading a newspaper. Alexei had no weapon, no plan beyond this moment. He looked at his family, his wife, his children, exhausted and terrified, and knew that he had come as far as he could. He was a doctor. He had taken an oath to preserve life. But he had also been part of a system that destroyed life in the name of state security. For 11 years, he had told himself that these 2 oaths could coexist, that serving the state was the same as serving humanity. He had been wrong. And now, in this forest, in this cold March night, he understood that there was only one oath that mattered. The oath to protect those you love, even when it means betraying everything else. Alexei gave Katya the bag with money and documents. "Wait here," he said. "Don't move until I come back." "What are you going to do?" she asked. He kissed her forehead. He kissed his children. And then, without answering, he walked toward the guard station. The guard's name was Private Yevgeny Sokolov. He was 22 years old, completing his mandatory military service, counting the days until he could return to his village in the Tambov region and forget that places like Sverdlovsk 45 existed. He was not KGB. He was not a true believer. He was simply a young man doing what he was told, drinking tea to stay awake during a night shift that nothing ever interrupted. Until Dr. Alexei Volkov knocked on the door. Sokolov looked up from his newspaper, startled. Through the window he saw a man in civilian clothes, no coat, breathing hard, covered in dirt and pine needles. The man raised his hands slowly, showing they were empty. "I need help," Alexei said, his voice calm despite everything. "There's been an accident." Sokolov stood, uncertain. He was supposed to challenge anyone approaching the depot. He was supposed to call for backup. But the man outside looked like a scientist or administrator from the closed city. Someone with authority. Someone who might file a report that would end his career if he handled this wrong. He opened the door. "What kind of accident?" Sokolov asked. "My car went off the road about 2 kilometers from here," Alexei said, forcing himself to breathe slowly, to appear distressed but not dangerous. "My wife is injured. I need to use your radio to call for medical assistance." Sokolov hesitated. "You're from Sverdlovsk 45? Laboratory 19, Alexei said. "Dr. Volkov. My identification is in my coat, which is still in the car. Please. My wife is bleeding. I need to make the call." Something in the young guard's face shifted. Perhaps it was the mention of a wife. Perhaps it was the desperation in Alexei's eyes. Perhaps it was simply that Sokolov was, at his core, a decent person who had not yet learned to ignore suffering. He stepped aside. "The radio is there. Be quick." Alexei entered the guard station. The room was small, warm, smelling of tea and tobacco. The radio sat on a metal desk, a standard military field unit, already switched on. Next to it was Sokolov's rifle, propped against the wall. Alexei moved toward the radio. Then he stopped. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Sokolov turned. "What?" Alexei had picked up the rifle. He did not point it at the guard. He simply held it, the weight unfamiliar in his hands. He had never fired a weapon. He had completed basic military training like all Soviet men, but that was 15 years ago, and he had forgotten almost everything. "I'm not going to hurt you," Alexei said. "But I can't let you call anyone. Not yet." Sokolov's face went pale. "You're making a terrible mistake." "I know," Alexei said. "I've been making mistakes for 11 years. This is just the first one that matters." He gestured toward a storage closet. "Get inside. Lock yourself in." In a few hours, someone will come looking for me, and they'll find you. You'll tell them I forced you at gunpoint. You'll be fine. They'll shoot you, Sokolov said. Probably, Alexei agreed. But not before I get my family somewhere safe. He locked the guard in the closet, disabled the radio by removing its power cable, and took the keys to one of the delivery trucks from a hook on the wall. Then he walked out into the cold night, leaving the rifle on the desk. He had taken it only to control the situation, not to use it. He was still a doctor. Some lines, once crossed, could never be uncrossed. Katya and the children were where he had left them, huddled in the darkness beneath the trees. When they saw him approaching with keys in his hand, relief flooded their exhausted faces. "There's a truck," Alexei said. "We're driving south. We're getting out of the Urals." "Where are we going?" Katya asked. "Away from here," Alexei said. "That's all I know." They climbed into the truck, a heavy ZIL-130 cargo vehicle, its bed empty, its diesel engine loud enough to wake the forest. Alexei had not driven a truck this size before, but the controls were simple enough. He started the engine, turned on the headlights, and pulled out of the depot onto the unmarked road that led south toward the regional highway. For the first hour, they drove in silence. The road was rough, unpaved in sections, winding through dense forest. Alexei kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights pursuing them, but there was only darkness. In the passenger seat, Katya sat with her arms around both children, holding them close. Anya had stopped crying. Dmitri had fallen asleep, his head resting on his mother's shoulder. The fever medication was wearing off, and Katya's hands were shaking, but she did not complain. She had learned in the past few hours that her husband was not the man she thought he was. Or perhaps he was exactly that man, and she was only now seeing him clearly. "Are you going to tell me what's happening?" she asked quietly, once the children were both asleep. Alexei kept his eyes on the road. "There's an outbreak in Sverdlovsk 45, a biological pathogen from Laboratory 19. It escaped containment," Katya's breath caught. "The flu, ... It's not the flu," Alexei said. "It's Agent K7, a weaponized hemorrhagic virus. Mortality rate is over 90%. You and Anya were infected. I stole experimental medication from the laboratory to treat you. That's why the KGB came to the apartment. That's why we had to run." She stared at him, her face a mixture of horror and disbelief. You knew we were infected and you didn't report it?" "If I had reported it, they would have quarantined the city," Alexei said. "They would have let everyone die rather than risk the virus spreading. You, Anya, Dmitri, all of you would have been subjects in their research. I couldn't let that happen. So you became a traitor," Katya said, her voice breaking. "Yes," Alexei said simply. "I became a traitor." They drove through the night. By dawn, they had reached the M5 highway, the main route connecting the Urals to central Russia. Alexei turned south toward Chelyabinsk, a major industrial city where they could disappear into the crowds, find shelter, make a plan. But he knew the plan was already failing. By now, Laboratory 19 would have discovered the stolen medication. The KGB would have connected his disappearance with the outbreak. Every police station, every checkpoint, every military garrison between Sverdlovsk and Moscow would have his description, his photograph, his license information. He was driving a stolen military vehicle. He had no travel documents. He had 3,000 rubles and a family that was sick, exhausted, and completely dependent on him. He had perhaps 12 hours before they were caught. They stopped at a roadside fuel station outside Chelyabinsk. Alexei paid for diesel in cash, trying not to make eye contact with the attendant, a middle-aged woman who looked at him with the casual indifference of someone who had seen too many strangers pass through. While the truck was refueling, Alexei went inside and bought bread, cheese, bottled water, and a newspaper. The newspaper was dated March 22, 1983. The front page reported on Yuri Andropov's speech to the Supreme Soviet, agricultural production targets, and a chess tournament in Leningrad. Nothing about Sverdlovsk 45, nothing about an outbreak. The Soviet press did not report things that reflected poorly on the state. But on page 6, buried among minor announcements, there was a brief notice. Temporary travel restrictions have been implemented in certain administrative regions of Sverdlovsk Oblast due to routine military exercises. Citizens are advised to carry proper identification and expect delays at checkpoints. Alexei folded the newspaper and returned to the truck. The net was closing. They drove east, away from the highway, into the smaller roads that connected rural villages. Alexei's plan, if it could be called that, was to avoid major cities, avoid checkpoints, and keep moving until they reached a place where they could vanish. Perhaps the southern republics, perhaps the Caucasus. Somewhere far from Moscow's control, where the KGB's reach was weaker and false identities were easier to obtain, but Katya's condition was worsening again. The medication had bought them time, but it was not a cure. By midday, her fever had returned. By afternoon, she was coughing. By evening, there was blood in her handkerchief. Alexei stopped the truck on a dirt road beside a frozen stream. He helped Katya out, sat her down on a fallen log, and checked her vital signs. Pulse elevated. Breathing labored. Subcutaneous hemorrhaging beginning to appear on her arms. The virus was winning. "How long do I have?" Katya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Alexei said. The medication slowed the progression, but without more ... How long? She insisted. Alexei looked at his wife, this woman he had loved for 13 years, who had followed him to a closed city, who had raised their children in a place of secrets and fear, who had never asked questions she knew he could not answer. He looked at her and realized that he had already lost. "Days," he said. "Maybe a week." Katya nodded slowly. She did not cry. She had used all her tears years ago, living in Sverdlovsk, 45. "What about Anya?" "I have enough medication for another 2 doses, Alexei said. "It might be enough. Her symptoms are less advanced than yours. And then I hope," Alexei said. That night, they slept in the truck, parked in a clearing deep in the forest. Alexei sat in the driver's seat, watching the road, watching his family. Dmitri was curled up on the bench seat, still miraculously uninfected. Anya was in the back cargo area, wrapped in blankets, sleeping fitfully. Katya lay beside her, too weak to move. Alexei thought about his life. He thought about the choices that had led him here. He thought about the oath he had taken when he became a doctor. First, do no harm. He thought about the other oath, the unspoken one, the one every Soviet citizen understood. Serve the state. Protect the collective. The individual is nothing. For 11 years, he had tried to serve both. For 11 years, he had told himself that the experiments at Laboratory 19 were necessary, that the suffering of a few was justified to protect the many. He had written his clinical reports in cold, precise language, describing human beings as subjects, reducing their agony to data points, and he had gone home each night and kissed his children and pretended he was still a good man. But he had never been a good man. He had been a coward. And cowardice in the Soviet Union was the only virtue that kept you alive, until it wasn't. On March 23rd at 6:17 a.m., Alexei heard helicopters. They were distant at first, just a faint thumping sound on the horizon, but they were getting closer. He started the truck, woke his family, and drove deeper into the forest, following logging trails that were barely visible beneath the snow. The helicopters passed overhead, military Mi-8 South, painted in standard army green, flying in a search pattern. They were hunting him. Alexei abandoned the truck. It was too visible, too slow, too easy to track. He helped Katya out, supporting her weight as she struggled to walk. He carried Dmitri. Anya walked beside him, silent and terrified. They moved into the densest part of the forest, where the trees grew so close together that no vehicle could follow. For 2 days, they walked. Alexei had no map, no compass, only a vague sense of direction and the knowledge that south meant safety eventually. They drank water from streams. They ate the last of the bread. Katya's condition deteriorated rapidly. By the second night, she could no longer walk. Alexei carried her, his back screaming, his legs trembling, but he did not stop. On March 25th, they reached a small village, a cluster of wooden houses and a collective farm, the kind of place that existed on the edge of Soviet maps, forgotten by everyone except the people who lived there. Alexei approached carefully, keeping his family hidden in the trees. He needed food, medicine, information. He needed help. An old woman was working in a garden, turning soil in preparation for spring planting. Alexei approached her slowly, his hands visible, his posture non-threatening. "Grandmother," he said, using the respectful term, "I need your help." She looked up at him. This stranger with wild eyes and torn clothes, this man who appeared out of the forest like a ghost. She should have been afraid. She should have called for the village militia. But she had lived through the Great Patriotic War, through Stalin's purges, through famines and winters that killed entire families. She had learned to recognize desperation, and she had learned that sometimes the only moral act was to help a desperate man. "You're running," she said. Not a question. A statement. "Yes," Alexei said. "From the KGB?" "Yes." She nodded slowly. "Come inside, quickly." She gave them food, black bread, pickled vegetables, hot tea. She gave them a room in the back of her house where they could rest without being seen from the road. She did not ask questions. She did not want to know. Katya lay on the bed, her breathing shallow and irregular. Alexei administered the last dose of medication. It was not enough. He knew it was not enough. But it was all he had. That evening, the old woman came to the room with a radio. She had heard the news. There was an announcement about a fugitive doctor from Sverdlovsk 45, wanted for theft of state property and endangering public health. The description matched Alexei perfectly. A reward was being offered. 10,000 rubles. "They're searching every village between here and Chelyabinsk," the old woman said. "You can't stay." "I know," Alexei said. "Where will you go?" "I don't know," he admitted. She looked at him for a long moment. This man who had tried to save his family and failed. This man who had betrayed his country because his country had demanded he betray his soul. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out an envelope. "My son lives in Tbilisi," she said. "Georgia. He works at a factory. I haven't seen him in 10 years. If you can get there, if you can find him, give him this letter. Tell him I'm still alive. He'll help you." Alexei took the envelope. His hands were shaking. "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone helped me once," the old woman said. "During the war. I was running, like you. And someone gave me bread and a place to sleep, and that's why I'm still here. We survive by helping each other. The state doesn't teach that, but it's true." She left them. Alexei sat beside Katya, holding her hand. Anya and Dmitri were asleep on the floor, wrapped in blankets the old woman had provided. "We're not going to make it to Tbilisi," Katya said quietly. "Don't say that," Alexei said. "Look at me," she said, and he did. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken, her lips cracked and bloodied. "I'm dying, you know I am. You've always known." "I won't let you die," Alexei said, even though it was a lie, even though they both knew it was a lie. "Listen to me," Katya said, her voice urgent despite its weakness. "When I'm gone, take the children and keep running. Don't stop. Don't look back." "Promise me, Katya. Promise me," she said, gripping his hand with what little strength remained. "I promise," Alexei whispered. She closed her eyes. "I never blamed you, you know, for the life we had, for Sverdlovsk 45. I knew what you did there. I wasn't stupid, but I also knew you were trying to protect us. And in the end you did. You saved Anya. You saved Dmitri. That's all that matters." "I didn't save you," Alexei said, tears running down his face. "Yes, you did," Katya said. "You showed me that there are things more important than the state, more important than survival. You showed me that love is the only thing that's real." She died 3 hours later. Just before dawn, her hand in his, her children sleeping peacefully nearby. Alexei did not make a sound. He simply held her, feeling her warmth fade, feeling the weight of her absence settle into his bones. When the sun rose, he wrapped her in the blanket and carried her body into the forest. He buried her in a clearing, marking the grave with stones so that someday, if the world became sane, someone might find her and know that she had existed. He returned to the house. The old woman was waiting with food and warm clothes for the children. She had heard the silence and understood. "I'm sorry," she said. Alexei nodded. He could not speak. "The village militia will come soon," she said. "They're checking every house. You need to leave now." Alexei woke Anya and Dmitri. He told them their mother had gone ahead to a safe place, that they would see her again soon. He did not know if they believed him. He did not know if it mattered. He thanked the old woman, took the letter for her son, and led his children back into the forest. The journey south took 3 weeks. Alexei and the children moved at night, hid during the day, survived on stolen food and the kindness of strangers who asked no questions. They crossed forests, rivers, and mountains. They walked until their feet bled. They walked until walking was the only thing they knew how to do. Anya's condition improved slowly. The medication, combined with rest and her own young immune system, had been enough to save her. She would live. She would carry scars, not on her body, but in her memory. But she would live. Dmitri remained uninfected, a small miracle in a world that offered few. On April 15, 1983, they reached Tbilisi, the capital of Soviet Georgia, a city where the air was warm and the buildings were old, and the KGB's reach was weaker than in the north. Alexei found the address from the old woman's letter. Her son, a factory worker named Georgy, answered the door with suspicion that melted when he saw the envelope. He read the letter. Then he looked at Alexei, this thin, haunted man with 2 children, and without asking for an explanation, he opened his door. "You'll stay here," Georgy said, "as long as you need." Alexei spent the next 6 months in Tbilisi, living under a false name, working odd jobs that paid in cash, trying to build something that resembled a life. He found a small apartment. He enrolled Anya and Dmitri in school under forged documents. He taught himself to stop looking over his shoulder, though he never truly succeeded. The outbreak in Sverdlovsk 45 was never officially acknowledged. The Soviet government issued no statements. The international press reported rumors of unusual activity in the Urals, but no confirmation. The KGB sealed all files related to Laboratory 19 and Agent K7, classifying them at the highest level. The residents of Sverdlovsk 45 who survived were sworn to secrecy under threat of execution. Those who died were buried in unmarked graves, their names removed from public records. Dr. Alexei Volkov's official file was closed on March 22, 1983, with a single notation: deceased in industrial accident. Body not recovered. But Alexei was not dead. He was living in a small apartment in Tbilisi, raising his children, working as a night clerk at a textile warehouse, and trying to forget everything he had been. On December 3, 1985, he sat down at a table and opened a journal, not the one he had kept in Sverdlovsk 45, which had been destroyed the night they fled, but a new one, empty and waiting. He wrote a single entry, the only record of what had happened. "Today is my daughter's 11th birthday. My son is 8. They are healthy, safe, and free. They do not remember their mother's face clearly anymore, and that breaks my heart. But they are alive, and that is enough. I was a doctor once. I took an oath to preserve life. For 11 years, I violated that oath in service to a state that cared nothing for life. And when the moment came, when I had to choose between the oath to the state and the oath to my family, I chose my family. I am a traitor to the Soviet Union. I am a criminal. I am a man who will never be forgiven. But I am also a father, and my children are alive. Today, I betrayed the state so I would not betray my heart." He closed the journal and never wrote in it again. Epilogue. The Cold War ended in 1991. With the collapse of the Soviet Union and the dissolution of the system that had defined the lives of millions. The closed cities were opened. The secret files were declassified, some of them, and the truth began to emerge. In 1992, a Russian journalist named Lev Fedorov published an investigation into biological weapons programs in the Soviet Union. Among the documents he obtained was a brief reference to Laboratory 19 in Sverdlovsk 45 and to an outbreak of an unidentified pathogen in March 1983. The report mentioned a suspected containment breach, a quarantine operation, and an estimated casualty count of 314 residents. The report also mentioned a missing physician, Dr. Alexei Volkov, wanted in connection with the theft of classified materials. His fate was unknown. But in Tbilisi, in a small apartment on a quiet street, an old man read that article and felt something break inside him. Not pain, exactly, but the final severing of a connection to a past he had spent decades trying to forget. Alexei Volkov died in 2003 at the age of 60. He was buried in a cemetery outside Tbilisi, under the name he had used for 20 years, Georgy Berids. His children, Anya, now a teacher, and Dmitry, a civil engineer, stood at his grave and mourned the father who had saved them. The father who had carried them through forests and across mountains, the father who had chosen them over everything else. They never learned the full truth of what he had done. They never knew about Laboratory 19, about Agent K-7, about the 12 subjects in a sealed room. They never knew that their father had been a participant in crimes that would have horrified them. They only knew that he had loved them. And in the end, that love had been stronger than the state, stronger than fear, stronger than the machinery of power that had ruled their world. The Cold War was a period of history defined by systems of ideology, systems of control, systems of mutually assured destruction. It was a time when individuals were told that their lives mattered less than the survival of the collective, that personal morality was subordinate to state necessity, that truth was whatever the government declared it to be. But within that vast machinery of power, there were moments when individuals made choices that defied the system. Small acts of rebellion, small acts of love, acts that would never be recorded in official histories, never celebrated in monuments, never acknowledged by the states that demanded absolute loyalty. Dr. Alexei Volkov was not a hero. He was a man who participated in terrible things, who remained silent when he should have spoken, who served a system that destroyed lives in the name of security. He was complicit in crimes that could never be undone. But when the moment came when he was forced to choose between the state and his family, he chose his family. And perhaps, in a world where systems demand that we sacrifice our humanity for the sake of ideological purity, that small act of choosing love over obedience is the only form of resistance that truly matters. The Soviet Union is gone. The Cold War is over. The files are slowly being opened, but the questions remain. How do we live when the system demands our complicity? How do we preserve our humanity when authority tells us to abandon it? And when the choice comes, as it always does, between loyalty to power and loyalty to love, which oath do we keep? Dr. Alexei Volkov answered that question on March 21, 1983, when he cut through a fence and led his family into the darkness. He betrayed the state to save his heart. And in doing so, he became the only thing that matters in any story: human. If you believe stories like this, stories of ordinary people trapped in extraordinary moral dilemmas, deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. The Cold War may be over, but the questions it asked are eternal. And there are many more stories like this one, hidden in archives and buried in memory, waiting to be told. Because history is not just about governments and ideologies. It's about human beings making impossible choices in impossible circumstances. And those stories should never be forgotten.